Welcome back. All right, so my fourth and final preview for Monday, August the 21st, is the Washington Capitals. So I talked about the Pittsburgh Penguins. I figured I might as well talk about Washington. Again, there is an order I'm going in for this. It's kind of silly, so I'm not going to get into it, but I'll talk about it after the whole series is done. But I want to talk about the Caps. So the Caps ended up with a record of 35, 37, and 10. The interesting part of that, it's the exact same record the Detroit Red Wings had. Both teams disappointed for different reasons with how the season came to an end. Both teams sold at the deadline. For the Capitals, it was a bold move to sell at the deadline, and yet in the offseason, that selling does not continue. The idea that, hey, maybe it's time to do a rebuild, both the Capitals and the Penguins rejecting that idea outright. At least it seems that way with the moves made in the offseason, and both for similar reasons. The veteran players from Stanley Cup victories that are on this team likely not wanting to stick around through a long-term rebuild. So both Washington and Pittsburgh try to hold that at bay. History, not necessarily kind when it comes to teams that resist rebuilds for too long. But again, I understand why the Capitals and the Penguins are doing it. How will the Capitals do? So, by the end of the year, the Capitals were allowing more goals than they were scoring. They scored 3.09 per game. They allowed 3.18, so they're going to want the goals against to come down, which I think it can with the right amount of defense this year. And again, it fell apart after the trade deadline. Their power play, 21.2%. I believe that's right around league average. Their penalty kill, pretty good, 81.9%. So not too shabby there. Those numbers add together to 103.1. So again, that's above 100. So their special teams did not hurt them. Their last playoff appearance, of course, 2022, a year ago. The last time they won around 2018, that is also when they won the Stanley Cup. So both the Capitals and the Penguins, again, the comparisons between the two, have not won around since 2018. So both in very similar positions, right? Both of them with generational talents. You've got Malkin and Crosby in one location. You've got Ovechkin and Backstrom in the other. And drafts, very similar draft years between them too. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And no cap space for the Washington Capitals. So if they want to add, they're in a tough position. They're going to have to get rid of some money in order to add. So their top five scorers, no surprise, Ovechkin's number one scorer this past season in 73 games, 42 goals, 33 assists, 75 points. Ovechkin, as well as Matthews, two of these rare guys who, when they score 40 goals and in that range, we go, they could probably score more. A bit of a down year by their standards, right? So Ovechkin, can he get back to 50 again? I think he can, because he's proven us wrong for so many years. But again, once father time starts to set in, you can't turn the clock back. So we'll see if Ovechkin stays in that 40-goal range, if he gets into the 50-goal range, or if he drops into the 30s this season. Dylan Strome, 81 games, 23 goals, 42 assists for 63 points. And it felt like with Strome that his career really kind of was rejuvenated by his time with the Washington Capitals. So nice to see Strome having a solid season. We'll see if that continues this year. If Backstrom plays a bunch of games, will that influence Strome's ice time? Kuznetsov, who awkwardly is still here. 81 games, 12 goals, 43 assists, 55 points. Kuznetsov still has term on his contract, and it's an expensive contract, and I totally understand why teams wouldn't necessarily be calling and making offers to pick up that contract from the Washington Capitals. For Kuznetsov, if he still wants to be traded from the Capitals, and it's possible that over the summer he thought it over and decided, I'm fine, I'll stay here. But if he wants to be traded, he's going to have to get off to a really good start. He's going to have to show teams, hey, this contract isn't as much of a risk as you might think. But he's still there. But the 12 goals in 81 games and a $7.8 million cap hit, that's problematic. Gustafsson, of course, before the trade to Toronto, he still ends up being the number 4 scorer on the season. Played 61 games, 7 goals, 31 assists, 38 points. Was having a career year, and the trade that they made with Toronto with Gustafsson ends up looking like genius at this point in time. Connor Sherry, who has now left the team, 82 games, 15 goals, 22 assists, 37 points. Sherry, good support player, but again, for the Capitals, looking to do things a little different. Their goaltending was solid. Kemper, 57 games, a record of 22, 26, and 7, 909 save percentage. Kemper was very good for them this past season, picking up where he left off with the Colorado Avalanche the year before. Charlie Lindgren, Charlie Sideburns, 31 games, 13, 11, and 3 record, and 899 save percentage. So he'll want to improve that number. And if not, does Hunter Shepard get a chance? Hunter Shepherd, of course, with the Hershey Bears. They win the Calder Cup in Hershey. And so we'll see whether or not Hunter Shepherd gets a look in the net if they give, at least a little bit of consideration to making a change. So we will see how that goes. The channel is not sold on a bounce back for the Capitals, which is interesting because they're betting on it with the Penguins. With the Capitals, only 2% of the vote said first or second for the Caps, 16% third or fourth. So 18% of the vote said they feel that they'll be fourth or better. 64% of the vote said fifth or sixth. Now, of course, there's the possibility 5 teams in the Metro make the playoffs and 3 out of the Atlantic. I don't know how likely that is, but at any rate, 18% of the vote said 7th or 8th. So 82% of votes on the channel were to the Capitals being 5th or lower in the division. And so basically betting on them keeping up this trend of, falling down the standings a bit. So hits leader, Favari, very popular player in Washington, 217 hits. That'll make you popular. Block shots, Trevor Van Riemsdyk, 160. I think a bit of an underrated defenseman as well, Trevor Van Riemsdyk. I think he's played quite well for the Caps for years now. But 160 block shots, not bad. Their leader in posts, Ovechkin, only 7. So earlier I talked about the Buffalo Sabres and Tage Thompson had 15. Ovechkin only had 7. So he's very good at hitting the net and avoiding hitting the post. And so we'll see this year if that number stays low. I'm guessing it will, right? Considering the number of shots that Ovechkin takes, only 7 posts is ridiculous. In terms of the next one, so the Capitals, a team that's been at the top and trying to stay in contention for a long time. Not a lot of blue chip prospects here. I went with Andrew Crystal, who fell into the second round this year, and Crystal is a fascinating prospect going forward because he was seen as a first round talent and then dropped out. So we'll see if teams passing on him in the first round end up regretting it. For fantasy sleeper, I went with Rasmus Sandin. Sandin had a very good run with Washington after being acquired at the deadline. He gives them a bit of a different look on the blue line, likely going to get, I would think, second power play spot. First power play spot goes to John Carlson, of course. And so, I think Sandin may very well have a really strong year for Washington. So the Gustafsson trade, which was a win for Washington, I think it could look like an absolute steal by the middle of this season. The schedule's pretty good when it comes to the Caps in general. 5 out of 9 games in October are at home. So 9 games in October, that's, a season that starts on the 10th and all. It's busy, but 5 out of 9 at home is not too bad. When picking the MVP, it has to be Ovechkin. And I do expect another season where you can tell the Capitals are trying to pass the puck to Ovechkin and see how many goals he can get, but it's worked. It's worked in the past. And with the goal-scoring issues this team could have this coming season, makes some sense for Ovechkin to be the guy getting the puck. But in seeing that goal-scoring could be a challenge, they pick up Max Pacioretty. Max Pacioretty, of course, injured his Achilles, ends up debuting for Carolina this past season. After that, healed, but I don't think it had healed 100% because he tore it again. So as long as Pacioretty is healed and healthy, Pacioretty can score 30 goals. Absolutely, Pacioretty, I think, can still score 30 goals in the NHL. The only exception would be if, with the back-to-back Achilles issues, will he have that mobility in his skating, right? Matthew Phillips is an interesting addition from the Calgary Flames organization. There were Flames fans that were convinced that if he was given a proper opportunity by the Calgary Flames, that he would be a solid NHL producer. Now he's in Washington. We will see if that is, in fact, going to be the case. Phillips' game, he was pretty good in the AHL. I think he'll get every opportunity to play for the Caps this year. Edmondson added as well. Edmondson good on the blue line, which, of course, when your goals against average is above 3, you're going to be looking to make additions on the blue line. Exits, Connor Sherry exits. Irwin ends up signing with the Vancouver Canucks. Craig Smith exits as well. Connor Brown, of course, off to the Edmonton Oilers. Brown got injured as well, as almost everybody seemed to for the Washington Capitals. Gabriel Carlsson signed in Sweden, and Carl Hagelin, who may not play another NHL game. His contract expired as well. So there's no core guys who end up leaving the team, but there's some depth that has left the team, and we'll see who steps in and fills that void for them this coming season. So they're going to be a fascinating team. I don't think they're going to be bad. I don't think they're going to be, this 80 points, I could see them finishing around there again. So that's not playoff level, but, again, It's going to be the same standard of get off to that good start, maintain that good start, right? So this was the first season they've been below 500 since 2006, 2007. So for Ovechkin, this is not something he's used to, and I don't think it's something he likes. Ovi likes the winning side of things, and he's going to want to get back to that. So that below 500 season does stand out. I honestly would not be surprised to see them below 500 again, but prove me wrong, Washington. The 2018 Cup, honestly, what's interesting with the 2018 Cup is that's the only time they've been past round 2 since 1998. So for the Caps, they do get that Stanley Cup 5 years ago, but they've had virtually no playoff success before that or since then. So getting back into the playoffs, having some level of success, going on a bit of a run is really, really key, or else, yeah, you can only avoid that rebuild for so long. Kuznetsov sits 9th all-time on the Capitals points list. He is 4 points behind Bent Gustafsson from the 80s, so no relation to Eric Gustafsson, I believe. It's a pretty common Swedish name. Bent Gustafsson, one of my favorite players back in the 80s for the Caps. And so, yeah, for Kuznetsov, barring a trade, he should pass Gustafsson early in the season. Ovechkin currently sits 72 goals behind Gretzky. Should pass Gretzky, I would think, over the next year and a half. If he scores 40 this year, that puts him 32 behind. He can do that. So the only way that Ovechkin doesn't reach the Gretzky record is if he ends up injured, if he ends up completely losing his scoring touch overnight. That's basically how that would happen, and I don't see that happening. His conditioning has been absolutely ridiculous over the last few years. And it does feel like as you get older, your conditioning is going to need to be that much better. Ovechkin gets it, and it shows with his goal scoring not really dropping off, even though he is in his mid-30s now. So one key thing is that Backstrom, Kuznetsov, Oshie are all UFAs in 2025. Backstrom, of course, coming off hip surgery, didn't look like himself this past season. Tom Wilson missed a lot of time. He needs to stay healthy with that fresh new contract being signed and all. Oshie, again, you know you're going to have nights where Oshie's not playing. He's likely to play probably around 60 to 65 games. And so this team's going to be relying on its depth yet again. It is one question mark I have with the Caps is, and this is interesting too because they did win the Calder Trophy. But when you look at that Calder winning lineup, it's a good lineup. But how many of those guys could step into the Washington lineup and help when there are injuries? Maybe in a bottom 6 role, but if they need skill guys to call up, there may be an issue there. But we'll see what happens with the Caps. Same as we will with the Penguins. And of course, those two being tied together, I find endlessly fascinating. But yeah, Ovechkin wants another Stanley Cup. I do get the feeling that is going to be a big factor in the decisions going forward with this team. Don't be surprised if they're around the playoff line, above the playoff line, if at the deadline they roll the dice and trade a first-round draft pick in order to make themselves better. It's going to be tough to make that work with the cap as it currently stands. But again, the good news is that usually the Caps can find some cap space. The bad news is it's usually due to injury. So I know the Caps aren't going to want to see guys getting injured, but that might be what ends up happening before we see any big moves with the Washington Capitals. So the question I have for people watching this is simple. You have a team that fell out of the playoffs this past season. Again, the 80 points, I think, is a number that's depressed a little bit by moves made at the deadline. They were better, and then after the deadline, things fell off. But is this a team that does need the rebuild? They're in denial? Or do you think, you know what, they can bounce right back, get right back into the playoffs and prove people wrong? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.